Welcome, everyone. We're so happy you could be here with us this evening. I'm Julie Gilkinson, and I'm the chair of the Social Justice Council at the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Rochester, and we were so happy that you could join us tonight for this program. The Social Justice Council was very excited to be asked by Mel Underbaki to co-sponsor this event because as UUs, we believe this in the worth and dignity of each human being. All people on earth have an equal claim to life, liberty, and justice. Our UU values call us to get educated, speak up, speak out, and work to create a world that works for everyone. Love is our motto, rather than hate and fear. So I'd like to introduce the woman who is responsible for this program, Mel Underbaki, who has a PhD in interdisciplinary education and is an educator, a teacher, formerly at the University of South Florida. Research interests include language learning, speech science, and teaching for higher order speaking. Thank you. Sorry. Dr. Underbaki is the founding member and director of Friends of Human Rights, which was organized shortly after the arrest of Dr. Sami al-Arian on terrorism charges in 2003. In 2008 and 2009, after the release of the video, USA versus al-Arian, she toured the U.S. screening the documentary more than 60 times on college campuses and churches, mosques, libraries, and community centers. She tours the world, so we're very fortunate to have her stop here in Rochester. Since the founding of the National Coalition to Protect Civil Freedoms in 2010, she has served as director of the Education Committee and as a member of the Board of Directors, as well as the Steering Committee, and also editor of their news digest. And I will let her introduce the other members that are here tonight to help her. So let's give a warm welcome.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you. We appreciate you having us here. I want to thank my cousin Bonnie, especially, who she told me about this place, and this I'm really happy about it. So. And the other people, these are our main speakers over here. On here. My far right, your far left, is Kathy Manley. She's the legal director of the National Coalition to Protect Civil Freedoms. She's from Albany, New York. She's an attorney there, and she specializes in criminal law and constitutional law. And she has, you'll be hearing more about her background as she speaks. And I say she is one of the founding members of the National Coalition to Protect Civil Freedoms. And next to her is Mariam Abouali, who has a double role. She's our director of our Prisoner and Family Committee. And she's also got a family member who has been impacted by the U.S. war on terror. And next to her, Ekran, I hope I have your name, Abdurrahman. And she is from Minneapolis, so she is our neighbor, and she has, many people in Minneapolis have been impacted by the U.S. war on terror. And I'm going to take just a few minutes to explain how we got our start. And I'm going to show you about a 6-minute clips of the video mentioned in the introduction. The video is about Sami al-Arian, who was a colleague of mine in Tampa and a friend, and he was targeted. So I'm going to show it to you, and it's like 6 minutes long, and then I'll explain a bit more. Okay. So.
directed the audit of all monies and property of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad throughout the world.
I was the only person who was not convicted. And I was put in solitary confinement 23 hours a day, and sometimes for weeks, 24 hours a day. I wasn't allowed even to see my therapist when she comes in. I wasn't allowed to call my families. For 6 months, I was not allowed to make a single phone call.
Sami Al-Arian arrived in court this morning before 9 a.m. under heavy security for a trial that's gained national and international attention. Al-Arian's defense attorney says this case is about a basic American right, the freedom of speech.
This is the First Amendment case, and that you have the right to be a member, you have a right to be a supporter, you have a right to take positions based on the violence. This is all First Amendment stuff. This is pure First Amendment stuff.
For 5 months, the prosecutors laid out in detail a case painting Al-Arian as the North American leader of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. But as news journalist Steve Andrews tells us, once the government rested its case, so did Al-Arian's defense without calling one witness.
The United States of America versus Sami Amin Al-Arian. I'll read the paragraph for which we have a verdict. As to the offense of conspiracy to murder or maim persons at places outside the United States, we, the jury, find the defendant Sami Amin Al-Arian not guilty.
The judge started reading 20 minutes of not guilty verdicts. It was unbelievable.
There was not one guilty verdict and 51 counts for 4 of these men. That's 200 counts. They didn't have a guilty verdict.
Mr. Al-Arian was not directly linked to any of the violent acts that we showed during the trial.
Prosecutors admitted their case lacks hard evidence linking any of the defendants to those violent acts, but they say that in a conspiracy, such evidence is not required.
Why did you vote not guilty on just about every count? I didn't see the evidence. There was no evidence against these guys. Not enough.
You know, a lot of it, I felt it was hearsay.
What would it take for a guilty verdict? Evidence.
No tomorrow, no tomorrow. And I find it kind of funny, I find it kind of sad. The dreams in which I'm dying are the best I've ever had. I find it hard to tell you, I find it hard to take. When people run in circles, it's a very, very bad. Children waiting for the day they feel good. Happy birthday, happy birthday. And I feel the way that every child should sit and listen, sit and listen. Went to school and I was very nervous. No one knew me, no one knew me. Hello teacher, tell me what's my lesson. Look right through me, look right through me.
Can you read that in the back? Okay. So those are clips from the movie USA versus Al Arey, which you can now watch online. It's a very good movie. It's got awards around the country, and it was a Norwegian filmmaker that made it. So it's another reason to watch it. Right? So what we did, I'm from this area, and I grew up in Burroughs, Iowa. So when this was happening, it's not my view of America, and I was totally shocked by it. And so we formed Friends of Human Rights, and Fred Bryant here, my tech guy and partner, we were basically took the movie and called every church we could find all around the country, we went all over the United States showing this movie. And we found that this was not the only case, there was lots of them. And I'm just going to sample them. For example, the Holy Land Foundation, these were, it's a large Islamic charity. Just look at the pictures of them. And they help people all around the world. They were 5 very good men doing very good things, but they were helping people in Palestine, and that was something that, and there was hospitals, widows, orphans, but that was not allowed. They were tried, they were convicted. And this was one of the co-founders, and he was sentenced to 65 years in prison. He was in his 50s at the time, so this is a life sentence for him. And he was, his youngest son, once he came to visit him, he ran to hug him goodbye. He was in the CMU. Because of that, he was denied any contact with his family for 1.5 years. So that's the kind of treatment people are getting. And he was in I'm not sure if it is, many of these people go in communication management units. There were 2 of them, one in Terre Haute, Indiana, and later on I studied one in Marion, Illinois. And they're very, very restrictive. When the kids come to visit, they talk to you over phone through glass. And so that's what a lot of them are. They get very limited phone calls. They also, speak, as we're all taxpayers, they are very expensive to maintain. It's over about $200,000 a year just to listen to everything. The government listens to every conversation, they read every email. It's expensive to do that. And these are just some samples. Okay, Zia Jagi didn't do anything. He refused to testify and cooperate with the government against other people who also didn't do anything. And that is his actual conviction, conspiring to provide material support to an unknown terrorist organization at an unknown time in an unspecified place. And he was given, because he refused to lie and against his editorial defense, he got 31 years. The older man who was the target of this, he was only given 18 years because he cooperated with the government. Okay, another one, I'm not just going to show you this picture because Mariam is going to talk about this person because he is her brother. And another, very common nowadays, a Sammy Oscar was somebody that I knew his family also from there in Tampa, Florida. He was schizophrenic and also low IQ and really had no money and no means of doing anything. Paid informants befriended him and spent a couple of years, recorded everything he said. And they got him to say things, make a suicide bombing, video like they do, and nothing was ever going to happen because he had no means to do it. And he was sentenced to 41 years. And that was a trial I attended, just a sample of the kind of things that go on. The key witness was testifying under a pseudonym. The defense lawyer had no idea who the witness was. And he was the key one. Okay? And these are just some of the people that we deal with. One of the things that NCPCF does, the National Coalition, is we hold family conferences because these are very, very devastating to family members. And these are some of the family members. And the man, that you see him, the second picture down, he saw his father for a few days for the first time in his life before he came to this conference. And he could not touch him because his father's behind glass. Some of his other kids have never hugged their fathers. This is a canary in a coal mine. I don't think you see what that is. But this is a dangerous situation. This could happen to any of us. There's a National Defense Authorization Act passed in 2012 that allows anybody to be arrested without charge, held indefinitely, and with secret evidence. And this is, I'm not sure how this is. You were familiar with Martin Niemöller's quote, his famous line, and then they came for the Jews, and I wasn't a Jew, so I didn't say anything. I saw this on Twitter, and it was a great update of that fits the current situation. He said, first he came for the Muslims. I said, guys, let's take a wait-and-see approach here. And then he came for the Mexican Americans, and I said, let's not be sore losers just because the other guy won. And then he came for the press, and I said, what makes this country great is our peaceful transitions of power. And then he came for the women, and I said, try to have some compassion for the frustrations of the other side. And then he came for the black community, and I said, I know it sucks, but wait 4 years. Have you heard any of these comments? And then he came for me, and I said, how could this have happened? I did everything I could. So on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Kathy Manley.
Good evening, everyone. So I'm a criminal defense attorney from Albany, New York, a little bit taller than Mel. So I got involved in these sorts of issues back in 2004. It seems like a lot of these cases happened 2003, 2004, and they're still continuing to happen. I was one of the defense attorneys for a man named Yassin Araf, who was a Kurdish refugee from Iraq. He fled Saddam Hussein with his wife and 3 young children, was a refugee in Syria until the United Nations sent him to Albany, New York, where he became the imam of an inner city mosque. And he was targeted by the FBI for some reason. I think that we learned later that they had misidentified him as someone else. They decided to go after him in a really crazy, unfair sting operation. And just, I can't explain, we don't have the time to explain that whole sting operation. But just to give you an example of the kind of thing that happened, that I had never seen anything like this before, and I had been a criminal defense attorney for quite a while then. The prosecutor came, soon after Yassin's arrest, came to court and said that Yassin needed to remain locked up pre-trial, which would take a couple years till the trial happened, because they claimed he was a terrorist commander. And we said, what? Because they weren't, this was a sting operation. What are they talking about? And they said that the U.S. military had bombed some sort of camp in Iraq where, the war was going on. And they had found a notebook, and that it said Kak Yassin on it, Yassin Araf. And they said the word Kak meant commander in Arabic. And we said, that's interesting. Well, we request to the judge to give us this page that they found so that we can get this translation checked out, because it sounded very odd. And the judge said, yeah, that makes sense. If you're trying to rely on this to keep him locked up, give it to the defense. A week later, we got a letter from the prosecution saying, oh, well, we talked to military intelligence and it seems like they goofed. It didn't really mean commander. It wasn't even an Arabic word. It was a Kurdish word. It means brother or mister. It's actually the most common word in the Kurdish language. It's a term of respect that's used all the time. He's from that region. His grandfather was a famous imam. It means nothing. He got out on bail. Then they tried some other maneuvers a year later. They revoked his bail based on his poetry, but I'm not going to go into all of that. But soon after, they had to give us this page, and he got out because they had provided false evidence, right? They invoked what's known as the Classified Information Procedures Act. And then the lead trial attorney, who was my boss at the time, Terry Kinlan, he got a security clearance just to see this evidence. And it was a major investigation of his life. And he finally got it after several months. And he said, okay, they built a special room at the courthouse. He went in there, and there was nothing there. But the judge had been getting reams of evidence every couple weeks, and he never got to see any of it. And we said, what? How can this be right? The Sixth Amendment to the Constitution says anybody knows, you get to confront the evidence against you. That's one of the parts of the Sixth Amendment. And here we have an attorney who even has a security clearance to see this stuff and doesn't get to see it. And the reason is because the legal standard under the case law is that you don't get to see the evidence unless the prosecution, or maybe the judge, deems it favorable to the defense. So calling Yassin a terrorist commander, that's not favorable to the defense, right? So if that had been under CEPA, which it could easily have been, we never would have been able to challenge that. We wouldn't have even known what they were saying about him, but they were giving it to the judge. So we never got to see any of it. We still haven't seen it, except years later, there was a FOIA request, and we got a piece of paper that said, Yassin Araf, AKA Mohammed Yassin Al-Qaeda. And we're like, what? We didn't know they thought this. We Googled Mohammed Yassin Al-Qaeda. There was a man named Mohammed Yassin in Al-Qaeda who was killed in 2010. And this was provided to us in 2011. So we think this is what got the sting operation started. But the sting operation itself, all Yassin did was witness alone from this informant to his co-defendant who needed money to fix up his rundown rental properties. And Yassin never had any idea, neither did the co-defendant, that there was anything illegal going on with this loan, because it was so complicated. And so the jury actually acquitted him of most of all the counts of the indictment, which were based on conversations with the informant. Yassin never said anything to show that he supported anything illegal or that he even knew that anything illegal was going on. And then when it came to the last count, the jury was afraid to acquit him. And the reason they were afraid to acquit him is because the judge told the jury that the government has good and valid reasons for targeting Mr. Araf. And why did he say that? Because of the classified evidence that we didn't get to see and challenge, with the misidentification, I believe. So the jury convicted him and his co-defendant, and they got sentenced to 15 years. And after that, Yassin's gonna get out in about a year and a half, probably be deported to Iraq. Meanwhile, his kids have grown up over all these years. 2 of them are graduating from college, one after 3 years with a double major, pretty amazing. But like Mel was saying, after this, I started looking at, and it wasn't just me and a group of people in Albany that had been supporters. We formed the Muslim Solidarity Committee. And then we started looking at other cases to see if this was so unique or were there other cases like this. And we discovered, yeah, actually there's a lot of cases like this. They're all a little bit different, but there's certain patterns. And we formed a group called Project Salam, and that was 2008. And then in 2010, we got together with Dr. Samuel Arian and Mel and a bunch of other people, and we formed the National Coalition to Protect Civil Freedoms. And around that time, the Department of Justice published a list of what they called domestic terrorism cases, 400 cases. And we said, okay, that's interesting. We can use this list and study these cases. These are the cases that they say are terrorist cases. And so we very extensively, we made a database and we studied each one of those 400 cases. And we published this report in 2014. It took us a long time, just volunteers. It's called Inventing Terrorists. You can Google it, you can download it from our website, projectsalam.org. But if you want to Google Inventing Terrorists, we looked at how many of those 400 cases how many of those people had actually done anything, and pretty much like less than 1%. So we came up with this framework that we call preemptive prosecution, and really it's based on the government's idea, because the government, Dick Cheney had this doctrine called the 1% doctrine that said if there's a 1% chance that somebody might attack the U.S. or come out, do something to hurt us, that if there's a 1% chance, we have to prevent that by going after them first. So he said this, and this was the model that they used, and this was what the prosecution in Yassin's case said at the press conference after the sentencing, when the media was pretty good in this case and was asking them, like, what did he do? Like, why did you go after him? Like, and they said, well, we don't think he was a terrorist, but we think he had the ideology. So they're saying that, and at the same time, he's saying they thought he was somebody else, but maybe they'd already figured out it wasn't him by then, but they didn't say anything. They said he had the ideology. So this is their model. So out of those 400 cases, only 4 people, and this is, from 2001 to 2010, so nothing after that. We kept studying them after that, but this report is on those 400 cases. Out of those 400, only 4 people committed violent acts within the U.S. or even tried to. Another 5 people, I believe, the same thing overseas. So that's 9 people out of 400, quite a bit less than 1%. 72% of the cases were what we call pure preemptive prosecution, where the targets were not doing anything illegal at all, like anything that we would consider a crime. They were either entrapped in sting operations, or they were charged with very vague material support charges or very vague conspiracy charges, like with Ziad Yagi, who was like the unknown group, the unknown time, the unknown place, basically, because you post something on Facebook that the government doesn't like, and maybe know somebody who also does that, and then they call that a conspiracy, things like that. So 72% pure preemptive prosecution. 94% were what we call elements of preemptive prosecution, where there was no terrorism going on. There might have been some low-level crime, possibly low-level drug dealing or fraud, like scams over the internet that had nothing to do with terrorism. And yet, because they were Muslims and the government was suspicious of their ideology, they treated them like terrorism cases and treated them much harsher. So we were also looking at, how did they do this? How did they get all these convictions of these people that weren't actually doing anything? They didn't kill anybody, they didn't assault anybody, they didn't rape anybody, they didn't steal from anybody, the 72% anyway. How did they do this? And one of the examples is, or one of the ways is sting operations. And one kind of outrageous example, well, Yassin's case is an outrageous example, but another one of the sting operations is a case called the Newburgh Four. And there's a poster over there that the Newburgh Four, it's the one next to Yassin Arif. These were 4 men from Newburgh, New York, which is an impoverished community a ways south of Albany. And what happened was the government took the same informant from Yassin's case, Shahid Hussein, and sent him down to a mosque in Newburgh and said, look for a target. They didn't have a target. They say they don't do this. They say they don't just go trolling in mosques, but that's exactly what they did. He spent a year in that mosque trying to talk to people, and actually the people there got really sick of him and kicked him out. So he was actually hanging out in the parking lot when he met this con artist named James Cromedy, and they were basically trying to con each other. And James is realizing that this guy's, he's got a BMW, he's dressed really fancy, he's trying to impress everybody with his wealth, and James is thinking, okay, here's a person I can get something from, right? James has nothing, no driver's license, no job, really down and out. And so they're trying to con each other, and Shahid Hussein is saying like, oh, we need to do jihad, we need to do something about all these crimes being committed against Muslims, right brother, and I can help you out if you want to work with me, I can give you a car, I can set you up in business, I can do all this stuff for you. And James is like, yeah, I'm really violent, I robbed all these places, I went to Pakistan and I blew stuff up, like totally false. He didn't do any of that. He's just like saying what he thinks this guy wants to hear. And they go on like that, kind of trying to con each other for a while. And then finally James gets sick of it. He goes away, he doesn't talk to him anymore for a few months. And then one day Shahid Hussein gets him on the phone again And he says, listen, brother, I said I'd give you $250,000, but you don't want it. And James is like, oh, yes, I do. I'm back in, all right. So that is pretty much the definition of what we would think of as entrapment, right? He doesn't want to do anything. He's offered like a huge amount of money. He says, yes, that's entrapment. And he has no prior history of doing anything like this, or even the ideology, whatever that is. So then he gets 3 other people to join this plot at the last minute, this plot where they didn't, the guys that were targeted didn't do anything. Shahed Hussein, the informant, supplied everything. These guys didn't even know how to find a map, didn't know what targets to go after. Everything was supplied by the FBI. And then at the end, they were supposed to push buttons on cell phones that were supposed to detonate an explosive device, but they didn't wire them correctly. And they say that's because they didn't really want to do it. They were just trying to get the money. And the government says, oh, that's just because they were so inept. Well, and the government also told one of the places they were supposed to attack was Stewart Air Force Base. And the government had contacted Stewart Air Force Base and said, don't worry, these guys weren't going to do anything unless the informant was with them. They're not dangerous, you know, don't worry about them. So basically they went to trial, they argued entrapment, and the jury convicted them because they were afraid, well, they might have been really going to push the button, like they didn't care about the entrapment. So they each got sentenced to 25 years, and they're serving their sentences. I don't know how much time I have. Okay. And the material support to terrorism charge is another one that's used a lot. It was used in the Holy Land case that Mel was talking about the men who ran the Holy Land Foundation charity. And they're like the most wonderful humanitarian bunch of people. And what the material support for terrorism charge says, if you support in any way a group that is on a list that the State Department says is a designated terrorist organization, then you can be convicted and sentenced to 15 years, although how did they get 65? Well, they had a bunch of different counts. I guess they stacked them up. They didn't even give money to a designated terrorist organization in that case. The organization that was at issue was Hamas, which basically controlled the Gaza Strip. They won an election there, and they were in control of the Gaza Strip. And the Holy Land Foundation was giving money to zakat committees, like charity committees there that ran a lot of the social services. And it was like school supplies for children and totally nothing to do with anything violent. And the government knew that. They admitted that. They said, yeah, we're not saying that. We're just saying that somehow this is helping Hamas. It's helping Hamas win the hearts and minds of the people of Gaza. So therefore, it's material support to Hamas, even though it's not going to Hamas. And these zakat committees that they gave the money to were also receiving money from the International Red Cross and the United States Agency for International Development. So the U.S. government was giving money to these same committees that these defendants were giving to. But because they were Muslim, they got the charges and they went to trial and they got convicted. And 2 of them were sentenced to 65 years. The other 3 got somewhat lesser sentences. And material support is used in many, many of these cases. And it was challenged that the idea that you could just have any kind of dealing with one of these groups. There was a group called the Humanitarian Law Project that was trying to peacefully resolve conflicts between groups, the 2 groups that were at issue in the case when they sued over this law. One of the groups was this Turkish Kurdish group that was trying to get independence for the Kurds within Turkey. Now this is a big issue in Syria. And the other one was a Kashmiri group, I believe, trying to get independence for Kashmir. So this group called Humanitarian Law Project totally peaceful, trying to help these groups work out their differences peacefully so they wouldn't be blowing things up. They sued and said we should be able to do this, work with these groups and help negotiate and get peace. And the case went all the way up to the Supreme Court. It took like 8 years for it to get there, maybe longer actually. And in 2010, the Supreme Court said, you can't do that. That's material support for terrorism. And that allows these kind of cases to go forward without any evidence of intent to support violence in any way. So that's a huge problem. So when we did our report, we came up with several recommendations, and I'll just mention 3 of them. One is about reforming the material support statute. Since the Supreme Court upheld it as is under the Constitution, Congress could, I don't think this is going to happen anytime soon, but Congress could rewrite that statute to require an intent to further violence to be convicted under it. That would be one reform that we'd like to see. Another one would be reforming the Classified Evidence Procedures Act to require that if a defense counsel has security clearance and the evidence in question is being given to the judge, it needs to go to the defense, right? And if they don't have a security clearance and they can't get one, then there needs to be a defense counsel appointed who has the clearance. And there's way too much stuff that's classified anyway, but at least the defense needs to be able to see this stuff if the judge is going to see it. And the third thing that is a major thing that we'd like to see is reforming the entrapment defense to be what it used to be. It used to be that the government had to prove what's called predisposition. Well, they still say they do, but they really don't. Predisposition meaning that the defendant had to be involved in illegal activity before, or had to be at least trying to do something like this, had to be on the path to doing it before they can be targeted, before they can be, convicted if the government's offering them something, like offering them money or inducement, they call it. So those 3 things would be helpful, and then there's a lot of other issues too with the conspiracy law, and I might be about out of time. Yeah, okay. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to either Mariam or Ikram now. Thank you.
We're not sure this is going to... Peace and blessings be upon you all. Thank you so much for coming tonight. So the video essentially is about the 9 young men who've been recently arrested in Minneapolis, sentenced to very inhumane and cruel sentences, one of which is my brother. There have been, I can give an outline of basically the case while this is being pulled up. Essentially what the video hopes to show is kind of the humane side and opposite and alternate narrative to what the media shows them as. And knowing my brother and knowing all of his friends, we know that they are not who the media says they are. They are not the terrorists that they indict them as. So essentially the case plays out as my brother was 19 years old at the time. He was going to college. He was working full nights as a security guard at a women's shelter, a battered women's shelter. And he spent his nights doing that and pretty much all of his days working and going to college. This was kind of the same theme for pretty much the remainder of his 6 friends. The group was a little bit bigger, a little bit less than that. And essentially they were used to all kind of, play basketball, hang out after college, go to eateries and things like that. And when the FBI targeted them for showing a sense of religiosity and an interest in their religion, and made one of their friends an informant and paid them thousands of dollars in order to entrap the remainder of his friends. And so they equipped him with a recording device and essentially told him to provoke, them by showing them videos of, ISIS soldiers and showing them basically a bunch of videos and having them kind of speak about it and give reflections. So they basically, and a lot of the Abbott is, if you take a look at it, is pretty absurd because it goes from talking about, do you want to go to IHOP? Do you want to go to B-Dubs? Hey, do you want to go play ball? Did you see Katy Perry last night on, and then all of a sudden it goes, the informant goes, hey, I've got this, new video, do you guys want to see it? And then they're like watching this video and kind of, boasting their manliness and whatever, and that's essentially what they're indicted for, thought crimes. None of these young men, my brother included, they've never committed a misdemeanor in their entire life. They don't have any criminal records in their entire life. They were all 19, 20, and 21. None of them were older than 21 years old. They were all like very, very talented, ran a lot of, youth groups, were, involved in student clubs at their college campuses. My brother had an internship with an IT internship with Genesis and worked at the hospital he was born in HCMC in downtown Minneapolis. They had a lot going for their lives, and they were indicted on, conspiracy to aid a foreign terrorist organization. The proceedings were long. A lot of them, came with witnesses that, they brought witnesses from really arbitrary places and places that didn't make any sense. Like, they would go paintballing and they would bring the person who controlled the paintball field and tell them, they look like they were on battlefield and training to kill people. This is a paintball field. This is what young men do on their free time. They brought him in court and used him as evidence. They would look at their Facebook pages and, see that one of them has got a lion as a Facebook profile picture, and therefore, a lion is somehow, a representative of jihad and representative of terrorism and representative of ISIS. The prosecution team got away with a lot. And because, they're basically speaking a government narrative in these very, basically well-carved words, these young men were all found guilty by a jury who was, none of them represented their peers. And my brother got, and they did split them apart. And so essentially what happened was my brother and the remainder of his friends were told, to plead guilty. And because the government doesn't ever want to take anything to trial because it's very expensive for them and it just kind of endures a lot of work, they want them to take a plea bargain. And none of the boys wanted to take a plea bargain because they were like, we're going to win this case. There's nothing they have against us except these flimsy recordings. And they basically all were initially going to go to trial, and the government realized this and basically told them that they were going to add a new charge, which was conspiracy to commit murder abroad. This charge is very rarely seen in any of these cases and carried a sentence from 60 to life. And so it really was giving them an ultimatum and giving them kind of, making them play Jeopardy with their lives, really. You either go to trial and try and prove your innocence, or and may very well get a charge that's 60 to life. A few of these boys were not given the opportunity to plead guilty, and this is kind of the way the government plays. They break them up into factions and they, pit them against one another. 2 of the 9 men cooperated with the government, and one of them got time served, and the next one got 3 years. My brother was the third who pled guilty but did not cooperate, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He was 19 at the time. he was sentenced in November. 2 others pled guilty. They also got 10 years. And the ones who didn't plead guilty and went through a trial got 30, 30, and 35 years. This is basically a video that I made. We made in kind of tribute and in an effort to keep their good legacy alive and their good efforts. You know, as a result, the community has been very much broken apart, law enforcement and the community have a hard time trusting one another. This is a video kind of, we told them, because they were all like very good basketball players, we told them that we were gonna hold a basketball game in their honor. And we called, you know, they called us from prison and we recorded them kind of, you know, and we made a video of basically showing all of their good life. And we have their audios played. And so this is the video. I hope you guys enjoy it. So I'm gonna quickly go over this and give Mariam a chance to speak. Now that you guys are kind of familiar with the case, it's very depthy. I'm sure maybe we'll have a Q&A session to ask for specifics if that's need. But I'm going to read a poem that I wrote the night before the sentence. We held a night of prayer. It was a vigil-like prayer at a mosque to essentially pray all night and make supplications that these young men would get low sentences. And then I'm just going to go ahead and detail just kind of a few things after that. This poem essentially looks at how reporters are sometimes very gleeful when they're asking you questions, very hard questions. So I'll read it in that perspective. And it goes like this. Question number 1. What is it like to be in prison? I wonder what it's like to be in prison. For the 2x2 cubicle to be your haven amidst rising to the thumping footsteps of 200 shackled ankles signaling you to breakfast. For muffled whimpers of mighty men made of ivory and tusk blanket you to sleep. And in the same way you crane your neck to the winding roads of a car race video game in hopes of getting ahead, they too press palms against all too thick glass panes in hopes of seeing a single ray of sun. A speck of clouds. What flavor is wind on bittersweet tongue? Does rain soothe a fevered body? Do ribs pierce each other when loneliness becomes like an empty well? We are hopeless. We are broken records splintered with so many versions of what if. Question number 2, what is it like at home? If all the bodies on God's vast green earth could lie atop the comforters of my brother's bed, it would still remain empty. There are nights I count the amount of times my baby brother asks me when the void will be filled again. Sometimes I monologue with his witticism. Sometimes I Snapchat a ridiculous photo to beloved Ummah, perhaps it'll read opened. Question number 3, what is it like when they took him away? Hurt feels like a ball of yarn whose beginning you cannot find. Hurt feels like shards of your favorite china you cannot piece back together. Like a mother whispering defeat between bloodshot eyes and hiccuping cries. Like an entire country invaded us. Question number 4, what do you hope to see? His face. Palms of different colors and languages clasped for the sake of his face. A human face for a living body. Limbs attached to beings both fragile and strong, kneeling in prostration or in common struggle. This is what I envision. As one of my favorite West African poets says, so here you are, too foreign for home and too foreign for here, and never enough for both. This is what life is like. It's a process of self-discovery, and this is how my brother felt when he was growing up. When he wore his traditional white gown on Fridays to prayer and attempted to grab a bite at the local McDonald's, he was spat at, yelled at to go back home. Unbeknownst to them, he was born just a few miles away. This is the only home he's ever known. Imagine owning a blue passport, having your baby feet imprinted on decaying papyrus-like paper, warming by the campfire during the chill nights of summer, and taking to the hills in the bleak winters of Minnesota, stressing about college finals, discovering detours and eateries in the cuts, kicking it with friends, barbecuing, basking in the sun with family. Yet somehow, someway, amidst doing all of this, you're still not American enough. Since my brother's incarceration, we've been approached by one too many reporters keen on seeking an exclusive insider to exploit with bold headlines the following morning. If they were eager or persistent enough, they perhaps even the same evening. It was a learning experience for us, being able to decipher which reporter externally seemed truthful enough to tell our story without warping it. And how do you do this? How do you look at someone's eyes and hear them speak so fondly of your culture, the foods you eat, how many Somali people they know in your community, and not trust them? I'd always thought having trust issues was a consequence of being betrayed by people whom you were more than just acquainted with. But I was wrong. And Cedar Riverside is a bustling, lively neighborhood in the inner city that has become a haven for many of my people post the civil war in Somalia. After being born in North Minneapolis, it was also the second place my family and I relocated to and called home for a few years. So when Fox 9 reporter Peg Hegseth took to the streets of my former neighborhood and harshly interrogated people strolling in the streets to the local grocer or having a cup of coffee with friends at the street corner, and he asked them, why is Minnesota a hotbed for terrorists? The survival mechanism in my first generation aunties, uncles, and grandparents is to say, I don't speak English, in lucid English. And this is the same interview that concludes with the anchor asking, why have so many Somalis relocated to Minnesota? To which the easy answer would be to seek refuge from war. But to which Hegseth decided to reply, in many ways, Lutheran social services, good welfare benefits, a welcoming environment for all the right reasons. The problem is, there hasn't been the kind of assimilation that you would want necessarily, and not for a lack of outreach. That's where the concern comes from. Assimilation means the process of becoming similar to something. The question then begs, similar to what? America isn't a homogeneous body, and its culture is no reflection of the indigenous people. Many are immigrants and attempt to balance their intersectionality of being American, being Arab, being Irish or Somali, of attempting to balance both identities and evade scrutiny and suspicion. For some people, assimilation means annihilation of our culture. For example, I used to be a frequent rider of public transportation, mainly because the campus I attended then was smack in the middle of downtown, and besides not wanting to sit in morning traffic for half your morning, you also didn't want to get overcharged for parking. I remember distinctly being in the backseat of the bus on my way home one evening, sitting across from what seemed to be an artist sketching in his pad. From my peripheral vision, I could see him glancing my way many more times than I could count, so naturally I looked over and he used the opportunity to give me a work of his. A drawing of Jesus and a few biblical verses. I was used to metro missionaries, so I accepted his drawing and thanked him for it. He started talking then, so I removed my headphones to hear better. You should believe in Jesus, he said. To which I smiled and said, oh, but I do believe in Jesus. The shock that registered on his face was almost hysterical, so I elaborated. Muslims believe in him as a prophet sent from God, the same way you believe in him, as God. In fact, we have a whole chapter in the Quran dedicated to Mary, the mother of Jesus. He looked skeptic, so I pulled out the mini English translation of the Quran I carry around and showed it to him. He fiercely shook his head, grabbed the line to signal a stop, yelled, go to hell, at the top of his lungs, and exited through the back door. Naturally, I was stunned and embarrassed that the remainder of the bus was now staring at me. And it stunned me more than anything that I'd done absolutely nothing to irk him besides being Muslim. I'd always been someone to take things lightheartedly, and this despite my parents' warning and precautions to stay safe, because the world wasn't safe for a young Muslim American African girl. That incident drove me from seeing safety in riding the Metro Transit, and seeing the seriousness in investing in a car despite overpriced parking fees, and painfully realizing that the wolf isn't necessarily stronger in its pack, that sometimes people will be complacent to injustices perpetuated onto their neighbor. Similarly, there's a lack of trust in my community. We like to think we're all heroes in the face of injustice, but the truth is you'll never really know where you stand until you're afflicted with a mishap. 7 young men ranging ages 19 to 21, all friends, were incarcerated to 10 to 35 years. And as a response, the former U.S. Attorney Andrew Lugar took reason in perpetuating an already existing stereotype and attempting to initiate a program titled CVE, Countering Violent Extremism. A program that only targets Muslim communities and is both stigmatizing and alienating because it furthers the assumption that American Muslims are not fully invested in honoring our religious and civic duties to this nation. Also, in light of the case of my brother, Catherine Bigelow took the liberty in producing a show in our city titled Mogadishu, Minnesota, which has a Somali character, and coincidence, an absolute coincidence, playing a role of a terrorist in Minnesota, and another stigma for the thousands of young, talented Somali youth who beg to be known as anything but. Just last week, I visited my brother, and as I sat across from him, I realized that I was looking at the bitter fruit of growing up in a society that marginalizes us, pigeonholes us as terrorists and extremists, and I'm left with the daunting question of, what will be the fate of my younger siblings, friends, and community members in the coming years as they attempt to navigate the world in a time where Trump is setting the tone about Muslims? Thank you.
My name is Maryam Abu Ali. I am the Program Director for the National Coalition to Protect Civil Freedoms, and I am also the sister of Ahmed Abu Ali. My brother Ahmed and my siblings and I were all born in the United States, where we were everything, in every way, an average American family. My brother Ahmed was the eldest of us, and we grew up in Northern Virginia, where he was a community leader. He was a summer camp youth counselor. He was well known in the community. He was in every way involved and active in the community. My brother graduated valedictorian of his high school, and he decided to pursue his passion, and he got a scholarship to study Islamic studies and Arabic in Medina University. So come 2003, 2 years after 9/11, I remember I was in high school at the time. I was a freshman, and all the Muslim kids in my school were all talking about the fact that their homes were being raided by the FBI. So there's like big buzz going on about, and a lot of fear and talk and gossip about the fact that our homes were being raided. And there was definitely a climate of fear, and everyone was really nervous, and all the kids were talking about it. So one day when I came home after final exam, I got home early. It was probably 10 a.m. and I came home where we lived in an apartment building to find 5 to 6 black FBI SUVs along with several police cars. And in that moment, despite the fact that we lived in an apartment building, I knew as the Muslim family in that apartment building that the FBI was there for us. At the time, I had no idea what was going on, except that, this is probably the FBI raiding our home at this point. And I, tried to go home, and my brother told me to go to the neighbor's house. So that day, we came to learn that after the FBI, once the FBI raided our home, and they actually, they did it early in the morning when my siblings were asleep, and my sister was sleeping in her bedroom, and they broke down her door, and they pinned my brother against the wall, and they then told my family that my brother had been detained in Saudi Arabia a week prior. So at this point, it became clear to us that if the FBI raided our home and my brother was detained in Saudi, that means he was detained because the US government wanted him to be detained. But thereon after, for more than 2 months, we did not hear from my brother, and we did not know whether he was dead or alive. And the US government was not giving us any answers. We contacted the embassy, the consulate, our senators, Congress people, and no one had answers for us. In fact, at that time, the US maintained that they were not involved in Ahmed's case and that this was a Saudi case. Meanwhile, the Saudi government was telling us that it was an American case and that they were holding him at the behest of the US government. So at this point, 2 months had gone by and we had not, we finally got our first call from Ahmed, and it was a very short phone call where, we were finally able to know that he was in fact alive, but still detained by the Saudi government. So my parents continued their search for answers, and they finally pressured the government to have him, to have the consular visit Ahmed in Saudi detention. And we would later come to know that the Saudi government detained Ahmed and tortured him for the first 3 days in custody. And then they transferred him to another city in Saudi where they continued to interrogate him and torture him for 47 more days, where he was denied food and water and sleep, and he was put into stressful physical positions. He was hung from his arms. He was lashed and whipped. And you can go to the next one. Okay. And during his interrogation, the FBI actually flew to Saudi Arabia, where they witnessed his interrogation from a one-way mirror, and they gave the Saudi Mabahith, which is the Saudi intelligence, a list of questions to ask him so that they were not immediately involved in his torture and interrogation, but they were a witness to it. Still, after 47 days, of threatening him to send him to Guantanamo Bay, of declaring him an enemy combatant, and of course torturing him, they forced him to read a written confession that they videotaped, where he talks about his conspiracy to commit acts of terrorism. Still, this was 47 days after his interrogation, so a little over a month and a half. Ahmed, who is again a US citizen, continued to be detained without charges for 22 months. And all at the same time, the US government was denying any involvement, was telling us that it was a Saudi case. So then my family, after collecting enough information through emails and phone calls, they contacted civil rights and human rights organizations, and they decided to file a lawsuit. And this was over a year after his detention without charges. And can you skip to the next slide, please? This is, so May 14th, 2004, my family meets with the State Department with an official named Matthew Gillen. And Mr. Gillen tells us that there is no active investigation against Ahmed and that a request will be sent to bring him home. And this is also after having received an email from the FBI in which they say, we have no further interest in Mr. Ali. And this was also published in the Washington Post. So at this point, we're, waiting for the government to bring Ahmed home because he's been detained for over a year without charges, and nothing happens. He's not brought home, and the FBI and the State Department do not actually request for his release or for him to be brought back home. So finally, my family decides to file a lawsuit in July of 28th. This was a little over a year after his detention. And in December of 2004, we won the habeas corpus petition, which was a request to bring Ahmed home. And Judge John Bates ruled that Ahmed, as a U.S. citizen, was considered within U.S. custody, and that the U.S., he ordered what's called a discovery, that the U.S. had to provide the court with evidence of their activities around his detention and arrest and interrogation. He also said that there was enough circumstantial evidence that Ahmed had been tortured and that the U.S. government was aware of his torture. So at this point, we were overjoyed and we thought that this nightmare was finally coming to an end. And unfortunately, rather than our government admitting to its fault, rather than complying with the discovery, they decided to bring him back to the U.S. and charge him based on the confession tape that they've had for the last 2 years. But somehow, for 2 years, they didn't think that this confession tape was enough to charge him with. It's only after we sued them and we won the lawsuit that they had no other alternative and they were not willing to admit their mistake. So Ahmed was brought back and he was charged with several counts of conspiracy to provide material support to designated foreign terrorist organizations, and so on and so forth, all material support clauses. Then they decided to add on 3 more charges, I guess for the wow factor, where they decided to charge him with conspiracy to assassinate the President of the United States, conspiracy to commit aircraft piracy, conspiracy to destroy aircraft. And the only evidence entered into the courtroom was the confession tape obtained overseas in Saudi custody. So every human rights attorney in the country was saying that how flimsy this case was, and there was no way this would, this would get through. It was going to get thrown out. This was evidence obtained overseas, and there was torture involved, and the case against him was slim. And my brother actually testified in his pretrial hearings and described the way in which he was tortured, and he was also examined by 2 of the most renowned and recognized torture experts in the U.S., Dr. Alan Keller, who's still the director of the Center for Survivors of Torture in New York, and also another doctor from the George Washington University, and they both examined him and testified that he was tortured and that they saw the physical evidence, and Dr. Lynn Gabby from George Washington testified to the psychological torture that he had to endure. Yet the judge refused to allow the jury to see the written testimony of these doctors, and he decided that to enter in the confession as evidence, despite the fact that it was obtained through torture. So in November of 2005, the jury convicts Ahmed on all 9 counts. He is sentenced to 30 years, and in the words of the judge, this is despite the fact that the so-called conspiracy did not result in a single actual victim. The funny part is that while the judge, if you go through the sentencing transcript, while the judge was reading, he was talking about the case and talking about Ahmed's character. Everyone thought that, he was going to be found not guilty because of the way the judge was describing him as an upstanding citizen and the number of letters he got from the community telling him what a wonderful and kind and generous young man he was from everyone in our community. Everyone knew him. In fact, the community members of our community laughed out loud when the charges were read in the courtroom. And he goes on for, over 10 minutes talking about his great character and even the fact that, while he was in U.S. custody, how the prison guards described him as a moral, or a model inmate. The jury did find him guilty, and unfortunately, the government was, despite the fact that, he got 30 years for conspiracy, which is not even, it's not like he actually committed an act of violence. The prosecution was not happy with that, and so they appealed, or cross-appealed, because we also appealed his conviction, and the same judge re-sentenced him to life. So, these are the issues that we brought up in our appeal. The fact that his confession video was under duress, under torture, that there were actual pictures of the vertical scars that were a result of the whipping on his back, that he was not informed of his Miranda rights as a U.S. citizen, that the U.S. government so the witnesses that were actually used in his trial were the Saudi intelligence officers who testified using aliases and through video. Ahmed did not, he was not granted his right to face his accusers. They're not held accountable for perjury as required under law. All in all, his interrogation and the confession that was obtained is all unconstitutional. Again, just like in other cases where, it was unnamed and unspecified, his so-called co-conspirators were also unnamed. And there was a lack of evidence on all counts. And then, again, just like we see in many of these cases, there is secret evidence that the defendant is not allowed to see. So the court came back with calling these errors harmless. And my brother's case actually set a precedent and has been used in future cases to try to get convictions for people who had been tortured overseas. So my brother, when he was brought back, was held in solitary confinement before he was even found guilty. So he was in pre-trial solitary confinement, and he continued to be held in solitary confinement until today. He's been in prison now for 14 years. He's also held under something called special administrative measures, and what they are is just another tactic to silence us and silence him. The media cannot contact him, his friends cannot contact him, the outside world cannot contact him. The only contact he has with the outside world is with his immediate family, and even that is severely restricted. And I do want to read something that I wrote on his 35th birthday. My brother was detained when he was 22, and he's now 36 years old, so I wrote this last year on his 35th birthday. And this is to give you a picture of what my family has had to endure and the restrictions that we've had to endure. Today, my brother Ahmed turns 35. He could have graduated from college. He could have started a career. He could have met a woman and fallen in love. He He could have started a family. Instead, he has spent the last 13 years behind bars completely alone. More than 1,600 miles from home, incarcerated in the Supermax in Colorado, my family can only afford to make the trip out to visit him once or twice a year. My parents receive 2 15-minute phone calls, either on a Tuesday or a Thursday. My mom has spent every Tuesday and Thursday of the last decade at home, sitting by the phone, patiently waiting for a call that sometimes did not come. And when the call does come, what can one even discuss in 15 minutes? Do you ask him how he's doing? How can you even ask him how he's feeling? Do you discuss his prison conditions, his legal case? How do you break the news to him when his aunt or grandfather has passed away? How do you comfort him knowing he was denied any chance to even say goodbye? Every phone call and every visit is a traumatic event, a constant reminder that our government will go out of its way to break the prisoner, his family, and loved ones. Last month, I had the opportunity to visit the infamous Alcatraz. Upon reaching the solitary confinement unit, I overheard a young man telling his friend, "Can you imagine people had to live in this space day in and day out?" I don't have to imagine. This is Ahmed's reality, day in and day out. It's the reality of thousands upon thousands of prisoners in U.S. prisons, including adolescents in juvenile detention. I stepped inside one of the dark solitary confinement cells during the tour and realized that Ahmed is housed in a cell not very different from the ones at Alcatraz. Even in Alcatraz, solitary confinement was used for a maximum of a few weeks. Ahmed has been in solitary confinement for the past 11 years. Rather than progressing towards a more just and fair society, our government's use of solitary confinement has been expanding and becoming routine. I walked out of the prison into the courtyard, sick to my stomach. The bright California sunlight nearly blinded me. I felt broken and defeated. I prayed and cried. I spoke to the wife of a prisoner recently. He spent 8 years in solitary confinement. 3 months ago, he was finally transferred out. After 8 years, he was finally able to have contact with his family. With no more plexiglass windows separating them, he was finally able to hug his daughters. Solitary confinement and general population are the difference between heaven and hell, as another former inmate told me. But after 8 years in isolation and deprivation of human contact, he's having a hard time acclimating. He has anxiety attacks. He has difficulty coping with the social stimuli. This is what our government does to more than 80,000 human beings. It deprives them of all sensory stimuli and human contact until they become anxious, depressed, and suicidal. They strip them of their humanity. They break them down, and in the process tear apart their families. How can we allow such injustices to happen around us? How can we allow any human being to suffer the monstrosity of isolation for years and decades? Humans are social beings. To strip them of this right is not only cruel and criminal, it is inhumane. It is a human rights violation, and it is without a doubt a form of torture, and we must put an end to it. We visit Alcatraz, now designated a historic landmark, as if it were a relic of the past. But I lay in bed every night and my heart feels heavy with an unspeakable grief, knowing that my brother still languishes unjustly in prison and in isolation. And every time I write about what my brother and family has had to endure, I feel vulnerable. I open my heart and I allow the world to see my pain. And I am met with deafening silence. I try to imagine my brother in his cell. Can you imagine spending all the years of your youth in a room the size of a closet? Can you imagine receiving your food through a slot in the door? Can you imagine being strip searched and shackled at the hands, waist, and legs every time you leave your cell to go to the recreational area or the visitation room? Can you imagine being stripped of even an iota of dignity? My world caves in and I can't breathe. And then I begin to pray as I have every single night for the past 13 years. Even on the days when my faith was shaken to its core. Unsure and wavering. But today, it is more firm and resolute than ever I need it to be. I plead and pray to the Most High, the Most Just. I force myself to feel a sense of renewed conviction. I am still here. I can still write. I can still fight. I will continue to channel my pain until my brother is a free, victorious man. I think about this quote by the author Yasmina Khadra with respect to what the government has done to Ahmed. They can take everything you own, your property, your best years, all your joys, all your good works, everything down to your last shirt. But you'll always have your dreams so you can reinvent your stolen world. I will keep dreaming of a world where Ahmed is free and where my family and I can help reinvent his stolen years, his stolen life, his stolen world. I will also continue to dream of a world in which every human being is afforded their human dignity. I'm fighting an uphill battle, but I also remind myself of the words of the Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish. We have on this earth what makes life worth living. And for me, the fight for justice, still, always worth living for. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Other than checks, what efforts can we make to change policy?
I think education is very important to tell people, and talking to your legislators, I believe, is really important. You can sign up for our newsletter to stay in touch with what we're doing.
If people are interested in writing to one of the prisoners, you can maybe make a note of that on our mailing list, and we can put you in touch to do that.
In terms of changing policy, I'd like to say that in addition to being educated, which is not enough, I think it's important to build alliances and coalitions with other communities. And so this is something that's impacting the Muslim community, but it is part of a larger system, and that's our prison system and our criminal justice system, which need vast reform. And so for myself, it's connecting with other communities of color, connecting with allies who are interested in this work and pushing forward. And there has been progress. I mean, President Obama himself wrote an article on solitary confinement last year, and the fact that, it's just cruel and inhumane. But the push needs to come from us. And I recommend that everyone educate themselves on our criminal justice system, on, in this case, terrorism prosecutions. I think the problem is that the minute communities or people hear the word terrorism on TV or in the news, they automatically assume, this person is a bad person and bad guy. They don't actually look at the nuances of the case. They don't read about how this person was charged, what the evidence was, how the trial went, and in the vast majority of the cases, just like in drug cases, there has not been an actual act of violence. And my brother's case is not an anomaly, and that's something that I've come to learn, is that every single Muslim community, especially in metropolitan areas, has been impacted by these policies. I personally, from my community, there have been at least 15 men who are now behind bars on charges of material support to terrorism. None of them have actually committed an act of violence. None of them have committed a crime. They're all charged with conspiracy or material support or just very vague, general charges that are either fabricated or brought on by sting operations. And in the case of when we look at Canada, for example, when a sting operation was brought forth to the Canadian Supreme Court, the judge threw it out and he said, we already have enough terrorists in the world, why are we trying to create more? So and that should be our attitude here. And we have to start thinking about our prison system that is extremely punitive, that devastates families, devastates communities. I mean, everyone in my community has been living in absolute fear for the past 15 years. Everyone is afraid. And it almost feels like we're living in a repressive regime where everyone's watching their step, everyone's watching what they're saying, everyone's afraid to go to the mosque because they're afraid of being recorded, of being monitored, or I don't know who to trust because this person could be recording every word that comes out of my mouth that's going to be misconstrued and used against me in court one day. We are living in a climate of fear, and we're looking at our political situation today, and this didn't happen in a vacuum. This has been the result of over a decade and a half of policies that have been slowly eroding away our constitutional rights. We didn't get here out of nowhere. We didn't just suddenly, we have the rise of white nationalism out of the blue. These policies have been dehumanizing Muslims and, projecting us as the other, as the bad guys, as the Trojan horse or whatever, as all Muslims are liars, all Muslims are extremists, and as if our faith is inherently evil or violent, as if we are inherently evil or violent. And then now it's rippling and it's out of control, and every other minority group is impacted. And so again, we didn't get to this point out of nowhere. It's because we've slowly let these policies take hold, and nobody has done anything about it because we're operating out of a mode of fear. Everyone's like, I'd rather be safe than sorry. Well, 50 years ago, as Fred told me, they used to say, better to let 10 guilty people go free than convict one innocent person. And now it's the complete opposite, where better to convict 50 innocent people than to have one possible event happen that's unlikely to happen. And so again, I think we need to stop operating out of a mode of fear and think about what's beneficial to our community and our society. And this is especially true for the prison system, where the criminal or the person who's deemed a criminal suffers for his entire life. After his release, a person, pretty much if you spend time in a U.S. prison, you're going to serve a life sentence when you're released, because you can't get a job, you can't get housing, you're stigmatized, you're outcast. So there needs to be reform on all levels.
So if we write to your brothers, are they allowed to read the letters?
So my brother personally, no. He's only allowed to contact with the immediate family, but most of the prisoners are allowed to receive letters. And we do have a list of over 200 prisoners who do receive letters from us. We have letter writing workshops, and we also have every Ramadan we fundraise to send each prisoner $100 to deposit into their commissary account so that they can, buy hygiene items, food, especially for a lot of the Muslim inmates who fast during Ramadan, since they skip their meals, they have to buy food from the canteen. And so that's something that we do. And so yeah, we definitely do write to a lot of the prisoners.
And now, when you mentioned that if we, you donate, we're glad to take up free will donations tonight, and then we'll go for those.
Yes, that's where it will go, is to the prisoners.
So, okay, I'm looking at your banner, the civilfreedoms.org. Are all the people that you discussed today, are there biographies on there? Are there updates? I mean, honestly, we've gotten a lot of information and I really want to follow these cases to see anything that's going on.
Some of them are, yes. Our website is under revision right now, but there is a section in there, Portraits of Injustice, and it does have some of these cases in it, yes.
But our website will be launched pretty
Soon,
probably in a
yeah.
month.
And we're going to be adding to those prisoners. I mean, there are many of them, so it's a very big job getting all of their stories, but
Okay, cool. You could write to my brother as well as the remainder of the boys that you've seen in the film. I can go ahead and maybe leave the addresses that you would mail to on the table over there with the remainder of the things. We've also made, aside from the National Coalition, a website for these 9 young men, or for the 7 young men. From the Twin Cities, and the website is freethebros.com, and it's under construction right now, and is also going through very many revisions, but essentially it'll have a homepage and a few tabs where you could learn about kind of the different cases and their specifics, how much time each defendant is serving. You could write individual letters. We're also going to have a letter generator on there, so if you don't want to write a physical letter, you could just write a letter on there, and we would print it out and mail it to them. We also have like a subscribe button and a donation button if you wanted to collectively give all of them money to put on their commissary or to give to individual inmates. So freethebros.com, that'll be it's under the works as well, so hopefully we'll have it done in a couple of months.
yes.
There's a Christian radio station in Spring Valley, Minnesota that in the evenings puts on the airs strongly anti-Muslim sorts of things, and I'm wondering what sort of counter effort is launched on behalf of openness to anti-Islamophobia. What Islamophilia, I guess.
It's a tough question.
Yeah.
The radio station is still on the air. It's a radio station, it's not a church.
I spoke at your presentation in the last fall. And I gave members of the Spring Valley community reached out to me and myself and another local Muslim leader, Muhammad al-Rashidi. He and I spoke in Spring Valley to quite a large group, over 100 people, about basics of Islam and misconceptions. But again, that was last fall. But that was a result of something that came out in the local newspaper that was very anti-Islamic. But I hadn't heard anything about the radio station.
It's an FM station as part of a national network, and I suppose they're getting their stuff from Breitbart or something. I'm not sure. But I'm just asking, what sort of counter effort is going on?
So I recommend you look into a new initiative called the Bridge Initiative at Georgetown University. They do a lot of good work on Christian-Muslim dialogue and countering Islamophobia. I also recommend everyone in the room look up something called Fear Inc. It's a report that came out about the sources of Islamophobia, the institutions that are behind this effort to antagonize the Muslim community. And it is a very profitable industry, and that's probably why it's on the radio. And so I think your best bet for the local community is to connect with your Muslim community and discuss efforts to counter that hateful message. But you know, it is at this point still free speech, and sometimes I turn on the Savage show on the radio and I can't believe that stuff is listened to, but I counter hate with love.
There is an organization here in Minnesota, IOG, Islamic Resource Group, who are doing a great work in doing the Islamic dialogue also, and it is based in Minneapolis, so it is iogmn.com. .org, sorry. So I am actually the representative there, Rochester chapter. I can direct any speakers, whoever needs, and you just go to that website and you can put where you want someone to come and talk. So they will do it for you, and they're really good. They do it. They're going to. What's the name of the? iogmn.com. So they are based here, iogmn.org. irgmn.org. And they are Minnesota based. So it's just like ING, the Islamic Network Group. It's IOG.
So Islamic Resource Group?
Islamic Resource Group. The name of it.
Also, I mean, I don't think it necessarily takes much in order to, counter hate with love. It really just kind of takes good-hearted people, or open-minded people at that, who want to, learn the truth about STEM. Because, we every, few years we have a different group who's targeted. The Jews at one point were targeted. The Japanese were once targeted. Indigenous people of this country were targeted. And, unfortunately, we do live in an era now where Muslims are being targeted globally and nationally in this country. So even small initiatives like taking it upon yourself to, go to an interfaith dialogue and, ask questions to practicing Muslims, to people who know the answers to your questions. That's pretty much all it takes to, kind of dispel these stereotypes and these misunderstandings about STEM.
I can mention that we have the local mosque in downtown. They do an open house every second Saturday of the month. Anybody who wants to ask about Islam. And also another local organization, the Rochester Muslim Community Circle, they do an open house on the third Saturday. Both of them are Saturday morning.
My phone went dead and I have no pen. Is there going to be a place where now I But is there going to be a place where a lot of these, where these resources that we're getting this evening are going to be in a place where we can go back and review them? Because that would be awesome.
We can post it on our Facebook group, so we are active on Facebook, so you can add us at National Coalition to Protect Civil Freedoms, and I'll actually post it tonight or tomorrow morning. But also, I don't know.
Also, we have another website called projectsalam.org that I'm involved with, and some of the case stories are there. There's a book that one of our people wrote a few years ago called Dirty Wars that describes a lot of the cases. Also with the Islamophobia in Albany, New York, we started a couple years ago a group called Coalition Against Islamophobia. And one of the things that some of the local Muslims have done through that group is set up tables at events that say Ask a Muslim. So anybody can come up and ask their questions. And usually we'll have like a Muslim and a non-Muslim there, so they don't feel like too scared to do it, but I don't know. Some people don't feel comfortable doing that, but it's worked sometimes for us.
Well, I was just gonna say, just the mosque, do go to their open houses, or they just mention?
It is in the newspaper, too, it's usually, as I said, the second Saturday or the third Saturday. And the Rochester Community Muslim Group last year invited the community to Fatah during Ramadan, and it's out of the college, and that was, a welcome and wonderful experience. So, yeah, do get to know your neighbors.
Good food at the iftars.
We can put these organizations on our websites too, on the union website.
Great, it's great.
Bill, would that be under social justice? Maybe a link to social justice?
Actually, I think it would probably be better to put it on our Facebook page.
Oh, Facebook.
Yeah. But one of the two.
I would just like to give a shout out to Regina Mustafa. Regina, stand up, our one-woman spokesperson. Regina conducts a monthly interfaith dialogue and is willing to talk to anybody and is willing to talk to anybody over a cup of coffee. She's doing a wonderful job of breaking down barriers and making people understand. So the applause is well deserved, Regina.
Thank you.
Regina, maybe you'd like to just say about your next CD event on the 16th.
Oh, okay. You didn't know there was going to be a quiz?
Thank you. Well, yes, I host a monthly talk show at the Rochester Public Library called the Faith Talk Show. I've been hosting it now for the past 2.5 years, where I have a person from a different faith or spiritual tradition on the show. I have had a UU member on the show before, 2 of them actually. But on May 16th, I have the director of the Art Center, Chad Allen, who will be a guest, and he will be talking about the intersection with art and religion. But also this, I believe also in June, I will have a local Somali woman who will be on the show, and in August, I will be taking the show up into the Twin Cities to interview a local nonprofit head up there, but also a member of the Muslim community. But thank you.
Also, her website, CD, is fantastic, because she writes and talks about her different visits to other churches, and I learned a lot about other churches from reading it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yes, she's doing an amazing job, and we all need a model. Thank you.
I'm not sure if I mentioned that we have a bi-weekly news digest, which you can sign up for over here. And yes.
Does that come in email or does it come in paper form?
Email.
Okay.
Yeah. You have a lot going on in this area. We can hear from listening to you. That's wonderful. So we need to do that everywhere,
How often do you get invited to churches?
Never. My church that we got invited here, and UU churches are very wonderful. Because that's where we've been a lot. But usually we contact them, they don't know about us. That's why I keep pushing education, because people don't know about us. But we contact them, and then we do get invited. So I shouldn't have said never. That was wrong.
So I guess if you know of places that, in other places or wherever, that want to have an event like this, then talk to Mel.
Talk to me, and I'm just down the road some of the time. Some of the time I live in Decorah, Iowa, so keep in touch with me.
I'm not a UU member or any church member, but I felt like from the tone of the stories, right, and I think that a lot of the people that exist in the Islamophobe realm that is deeply embedded in rural Minnesota and all over, right? That these sort of stories of the actual injustice in the way that it affects people, I don't think that the majority of people around us, granted it's based in a lot of ignorance, but I don't think the majority of people around us have been exposed to that, and that, you know, this environment happens to be, this environment and schools, right, where you have a captive audience. Granted, my hometown is having a hard time even reading a Muslim book right now, but that tells a story. But like, this environment is conducive to compassion and empathy, and if there was a way, you know, I'm not telling you how to do your job, but if there was a way, an opportunity for you to have this type of discussion in a church, I think that it could have a really powerful effect. You know, I don't know if you can get your foot in the door of mega church or, you know, but it would have a really powerful effect on a great number of people if we could create a relationship with a pastor, a reverend, or somebody to be able to share that story. Even just these two stories is enough. I don't know if they'd give you enough time, but, you know, we shorten the story and figure it out. I feel like I'm your agent right now. I'm just saying, I think it would be a really powerful idea, you know.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I mean, we've really been working on that, and it's you know, when I say to educate, I mean educate yourself and educate other people. You know, find those sources, places that would like to invite us in if they knew we were here. Yeah. And anything you can do to help with that, we greatly appreciate it. So, thank you.
Right, and usually you can't just, you know, walk into a random church and be like, I'd like to have my event here. It takes a connection to, you know, a plug-in. So that's exactly what Mel is saying, is that if you know of a church that would like to host us, connect us, because it always takes a person that knows that church to invite us in, rather than us inviting ourselves.
Or schools, colleges.
Yeah, so we just spoke at Luther College on Wednesday and Thursday as well. So if you know of any universities, schools, seminaries, or, you know, any venue that is willing to hear us out, and, you know, we'd love to talk.
Yeah, and even we have run in high schools in the past, and high school students are, you know, they're our future, and they're very receptive. So, I mean, anything like that, if you have any suggestions, just get my card and send me your
Have you talked to anyone from UMR yet? Because I used to work there at the University of Minnesota Rochester. Have you had a talk there?
No.
Okay.
No, if you can connect.
I know some people.
Muslim student group too, like there, so that way. Yeah. Well, I think this has been great, and it's after 9. They've got to go back to Decorah. Some of you have yes, there's a donation plate, and we can. Alita will have one if you go out that door. So yeah, so let's just thank you all.